Store podcast.
No more Roman hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God, dear boy.
Welcome to the House by Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be Sean.
Hello.
And that'll be it because Derek's not able to join us today. But on this episode, we'll be discussing the original Night of the Living Dead, the George Romero film that essentially launched the current iteration or version of what a zombie is and defined that for generations to come. Because the zombie that existed before Night of the Living Dead was more of the kind of voodoo zombie. And then Night of the Living Dead came out and kind of changed that. And then, you know, without Night of the Living Dead, there's so much stuff we wouldn't have today. So we're talking about that movie. But before that, we'll go through recent news and things we've been watching. Recent news, so we're recording on July 24th, 2017. And after Comic-Con, there's been a number of things that happened. And leading up to Comic-Con, there was some trailers released. So there were trailers released for the new Guillermo del Toro movie, The Shape of Water, which a lot of people pointed out looks kind of like a Hellboy prequel.
Yeah.
The titular character, or not the titular, the character, the creature kind of looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon, and or more accurately looks like Abe Sapien from Hellboy. And I believe that it's all done by Doug Jones, like the suit work and the creature work, who was Abe Sapien and some other characters in Hellboy. And it's set like in a World War, like, or Cold War era, I believe. And it looks kind of like BioShock-ish in terms of like underground facilities and stuff.
Yeah, right up there with Cure for Wellness. You could probably take a lot of elements from both those films and make a nice little BioShock trailer.
Yeah, and the like the lead female character is mute and uses sign language, so that's an interesting twist because like his prior film that was kind of like a dark fairy tale for human, or not for humans, all of them for humans.
That sounds like a good book. Dark fairy tales for humans.
Yeah, we need to get on writing that. It's dark fairy tales for adults, kind of, with Pan's Labyrinth. And,
to be fair, children aren't humans, William.
Yeah, but so it's like Pan's Labyrinth looked like a little bit more fantastical because it looks like in this there's just kind of like maybe one creature that is different. But I'm excited to watch this because I really loved Pan's Labyrinth and I've liked a lot of Guillermo del Toro's stuff. And it looks like this is another movie that hopefully it didn't cost too much because the general movie-going audience's appetite for this type of stuff seems to vary wildly. With something like Crimson Peak that he made not being a huge box office success. And I think like the biggest grossing movie domestically he's made was Pacific Rim. And even that only got a sequel because of the overseas numbers.
Yeah. And he's not directing that sequel, just producing it, I believe.
Yeah, so hopefully this movie will be good and then hopefully be received well because I just like seeing more stuff from him. But the cast for it looks good and the concept looks good. And, you know, Creature from the Black Lagoon is one of my favorite, like, Universal monster movies. And out of all the ones they're giving, like, remakes to and trying to bring back in their connected cinematic dark universe crap, like, the fact that they haven't looked at Creature from the Black Lagoon is interesting because it seems like one that's ripe to remake with current prosthetics and technology where it could look more like what the Shape of Water trailer looks like.
They are doing that now, though, right?
The Creature from the Black Lagoon?
Yeah.
I know it's been rumored for a long time.
I think somebody might be cast as it. I'm not for sure because it's part of the universe movies.
I don't remember if they. I thought they cast like the Invisible Man, and then they had Dr. Jekyll and Tom Cruise as the mummy fighter. And let's see
here. I'm kind of looking up some stuff about it. I don't know. Deadline had an article about it. It's from the scripter of Aquaman. Yeah, maybe they didn't cast anybody yet. But I remember seeing some news about that because I was really wondering what that approach was going to be.
Let's see. So there's been discussion of Channing Tatum being in a Van Helsing film that would tie into the Universal Dark Universe. And
that's funny.
And it said that the Dark Universe will include films such as Bride of Frankenstein, which they are trying to get Angelina Jolie, theoretically, based on some rumors. And for that film, they're trying to get Bill Condon as director, who directed Beauty and the Beast recently. The Invisible Man, starring Johnny Depp. And, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is yet to begin casting, but written by the Aquaman writer, Will Beall.
There's a story from 2 years ago said Scarlett Johansson was offered the lead in the Creature from the Black Lagoon remake.
Yeah.
And it seems like, that's a totally different thing. But this article, mentions Dracula Untold, but then it says there's a reboot of The Mummy also in the works. So it sounds like this is, totally different direction now maybe, but it sounds like they have been kind of trying to dig somebody up for casting for a while on this film, actually.
Well, I remember there were rumors or it was in different levels of production over the years. At one point, John Carpenter was attached, and it seems like one of those movies that just hasn't gotten made. I mean, you have to update some elements of it to be more modern, but I think that with the modern prosthetics and CG, not to use it as a CGI monster, but to use it to help clean stuff up and to clean up prosthetics, I think you could make it look amazing now. It's just, it's a pretty straightforward story that may not necessarily translate super well to today, but I think you could update it for something that would work great. But, the Shape of Water is a different type of story. It's kind of it seems where they've caught this creature and it's being studied, so it's a little bit different tact, but I'm excited to see what comes out of it, and I'm always excited for anything from Del Toro. So
yeah, I'm not extremely hyped on it, but because it's him, obviously I'm very interested. But also Pan's Labyrinth, I need to watch that again, because I enjoyed it, but I was not for me, I pick a lot of other films as a favorite of his, maybe just based on my taste, but I do like kind of fairy tale films when they're done really well, and not that he doesn't do that well, but yeah, I'm still obviously excited for it and going to see it to support it, but I hope it turns out well also.
Yep. So speaking of something where the director is not really the draw to the project so much, so it was announced at Comic-Con in a somewhat unconventional way. It wasn't at a panel or anything. It was via a live stream from a Facebook page. Blumhouse will be producing the live-action Spawn film that's going to be directed and written by Todd McFarlane. And I know we just talked about this movie's been kicked around for a while, and it's been in discussions for a long time. But with Blumhouse behind it, it sounds like it actually could happen now. Because they are ones who can get movies made on the cheap. And I know that from the stuff I read, Todd McFarlane was only looking for the budget to be around $10 million. So, I mean, that falls in line. I think a lot of times, though, they had rules in place about how much money and, shooting time was given directors based on their track record. And that's why something like Get Out had, a budget that was under $5 million, was because it was, the first feature from Jordan Peele and, these other factors. So how all that plays into this, I don't know, because it's a pre-existing IP that's had a film made before. Not exactly the greatest reputation for it, but it's going to be a hard R film, and it's supposed to be dark. And Spawn is supposed to be kind of on the peripheral of the story, the periphery, not necessarily the lead. At least that's what I heard is in interviews with McFarlane before, because I couldn't imagine making a CG-laden superhero film for $10 million. It would be almost sci-fi level, sci-fi television show, movie of the week type level. If that's what they're going for.
You mean Spawn 1997 level?
Well, yeah, that's true.
That could easily be done on maybe $4 million now, in 2017.
Yeah, so
at least the CGI budget. I mean,
because I remember a couple of years ago seeing a short film that had Spawn in it online that was a fan film that used the character, in my opinion, more effectively than the movie did, because the movie had Spawn up front as kind of the quippy anti-hero, as opposed to I think the tact that the animated series took, the HBO animated series, where he was more of kind of the boogeyman and on the periphery of the story. I mean, now, like, the first season had him more heavily featured. Like, the later seasons, he was kind of more, like, you know, heavily featured because he's the character that's based on, but they had just other stuff like the Sam and Twitch stuff, which I think where you ground it with the kind of detectives, and then you have the kind of Spawn hell stuff going on the edges of the story, which I think is a better way to go than trying to play it straight and make it a big budget franchise at this point.
Yeah.
Just because it's been so long, and I think the fan base is kind of eroded.
Yeah, or two, it's just a good launching point for it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if for some reason this explodes, and they feel like, okay, we can put, you know, $60 million into this, into a sequel or something like that, and then you give the fans, quote unquote, what they really want, and then kind of make Spawn the central character. That would be kind of a nice balance, because then the sequel could feel fresh and not just kind of the same thing again, and they would feel like two different movies. I'm not holding my breath that this is going to be stellar, but always keep an open mind, and always hope that it will be, you know, every film will be.
Yeah, the thing that gives me a little bit of hope is that Blumhouse is producing it, and I mean, they put out some stinkers. There's stuff they put out that's been bad and hasn't done well, but for the most part, it seems they have a pretty good process in place for finding partners to work with on the films, and, you know, reining the directors in, and not, you know, having something, even if it turns out to be terrible, it won't go wildly over budget. But, you know, like, I didn't necessarily have, like I said, the Spawn animated series, I would not have a problem seeing that continued because I thought that was good. The movies, I wasn't, like, really on the edge of my seat to see again, but if this can be done well and deliver on what made Spawn work as a comic back from, like, the era when I read it, then I think it could be entertaining. And if they keep the budget relatively low and keep it low stakes, then it could be successful. Just because, like, you know, the fact that it was a movie, I don't think it's a movie that's in the popular consciousness anymore. I mean, it's on Netflix, so people are probably watching it because of that. But I don't think anybody was at the edge of their seat waiting for it to hit Netflix. Or if they were, they hadn't watched it since the 90s, probably. Yeah,
I mean, I was kind of like, yeah, I'd like to see new Spawn. Then I watched the movie, and I'm like, no, I wouldn't.
I mean, because, like, the thing is,
do you think they could update it well? Like, do you think, you know, there's something there as far as the tone and just everything about it, or is it stuck in the 90s?
I mean, the tone of it, like, there wasn't, like, much of an overriding message, really. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, I think you could, because you've had stuff like Sin City, like the ultra-violent graphic novel type stuff translated to film. And, you know, the first Sin City was a big hit, the second one not. So I think that type of gritty, noirish type stuff has maybe run its course.
Yeah.
The hyper-stylized. So hopefully I don't think they won't be going down that route. But, like, beyond that, though, like, I mean, Spawn, you have kind of the cool stuff with, like, heaven and hell, and, you know, like, angels sent from heaven to attack him, but since he's your protagonist, they're the antagonist, and there's all these different things I think are interesting plot points they could go after, but the anti-hero thing has been done a lot since the late 90s.
Yeah.
You know, kind of noirish, stylized, comic adaptations have been done, and, you know...
And if you don't do it right, it can come off cheesy. You know what I mean? Like, it's a fine balance, because there's been so many parodies of that and everything.
Well, there's, like, The Spirit, the movie that Frank Miller directed after Sin City, that was a huge bomb. So I think if they try to amp up the elements that made it such a big deal in the mid-90s, it might not do very well. But if they just kind of use the character as a boogeyman and play it as if, like, so in that world, like, the superhero is the bad guy in the shadows, and that's what they're playing with, and maybe that can work. And they make it actually scary.
Yeah, I feel like they would really have to kind of reinvent the vision of it almost.
Yeah,
like a great deal, just because, like you said, a lot of that has been done before. You know, that property, and not to say some properties aren't timeless or whatever, but that property just felt very much of its time.
Yeah.
And because this is from the original creator, you almost wonder if he is just, you know, he knows that inside and out, and it is what it is to him. Is he willing to kind of break everything down and build it back up and make something kind of new with a loose foundation? Like, you could see a lot of other directors taking that approach with it, and maybe making some fans mad, but possibly making a good movie out of it. it'll just be interesting to see what he does with it. Like it's cool to kind of see that. It's not like, well, we'll have to wonder, if this gets made, we want to wonder like, oh, what would that have been if he would have got his wish, because again, if you give the original creators the power to make something, like that's all you can do and just hope that it turns out well. So I'm very interested in seeing how that turns out for sure. And I hope it is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it turns out well. I mean, until you see it. I mean, too, it's been announced. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get made because we have seen stuff that falls apart at certain points. So I think Blumhouse typically, once something gets announced, they get it in motion and get it made. So hopefully it's good, and hopefully they pick out the elements of that character that can work in the context of like being the scary villain on the edges of, or maybe bring in some of the other creatures or something. But
yeah,
but it's supposed to be super dark and hard R, so we'll see how that goes. But
he'll just be in Purge, 5. He'll be out there in the Purge.
I mean, that would be more entertaining than Spawn 97.
Yeah, yep, it would.
See, so other news: the trailer for Ready Player One was shown, and it was a book that was written a while back that Steven Spielberg is going to direct, and it's essentially like in the near future, there's a massively multiplayer online game that's like VR. And the creator of it dies, but like in the game there's an Easter egg or something hidden that like lets you get his fortune. So people are trying to find the clues or whatever to get his fortune and become wealthy. And that's the basic premise for it. But the thing that's got all the horror fans talking is in the trailer there's a glimpse of Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
As, like within the virtual world, like one of the characters.
Vaporized.
Yeah, so
There's tons of stuff. DeLoreans, Tron light cycles. I think maybe the bike from Akira.
Yeah, there's a bunch of
Iron
stuff
Giant.
in there that's references to other movies and pop culture.
I started reading that just because when it came out, a lot of people were talking about it, and I just sort of fell off. I thought it was kind of the setup was interesting. Essentially, it was kind of the future, things are run down like they lived in the stacks, I think it was called, and it was almost like a bunch of trailers and stuff like literally stacked on top of each other. So it was like, they were like almost high rises, but everything was just super dilapidated and just like broken. So technology, this guy, he would like run around and kind of collect stuff and kind of, I guess, I don't know if he built his own stuff, but anyway, VR in that was almost like a drug because things were so crappy. People would essentially get addicted to going into virtual reality because it was like an escape from how crappy the world is.
Yeah. And
I really thought that was and it was almost like a drug. I thought that was an awesome setup. But for some reason, I kind of just fell off like pretty quickly after that. Have you seen any of the pages passed around from that on Twitter?
No.
It seems, because I also had heard like some people after I'd bought it being like, it's actually not that good. And I was like already falling off and I was like, I'm just going to stop. But some of those pages, it was literally like, there was maybe a half a page screenshot and it was like, he name drops like maybe like 60 references of 80s things. He's like, oh, I've got my DeLorean and I also put on a Sega Genesis tag on the back. And this, like, it's literally just thing after thing of fan service mentions.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's kind of, I don't know, somebody called it like 50 Shades of Nerd because it was just something that like tingles like nerd senses.
Nerd
So,
porn.
yeah. So, Spielberg's handling. So hopefully they make some major changes to it if it's not as strong as some people were saying originally. But I've seen a lot of people trashing that book now more openly. But I kind of heard a little bit of rumblings when it first came out.
I mean, too, you have Spielberg because like another thing is the game's creator was like a big fan of stuff from the 80s because of the time he grew up. So that's what a lot of the references are in the game. So, I mean, there's not a lot of directors better to reference things from the 80s than Spielberg.
Yeah.
Because, just say what you will about his more recent movies, but like him and Zemeckis, but he had his hand in so many things. He was involved with Back to the Future. And
directed Poltergeist.
Yeah. Had his hand on so many different properties. And, Indiana Jones. All these things are very, from that era, he's heavily involved in. So it makes sense for him to direct it. It's just whenever video games or VR or stuff like that is handled in movies, it's typically corny and I can't think of almost any good examples of it where I'm like in. I always think of like Lawnmower Man or stuff like that. But I mean, so this maybe could be the one that turns the tide. But like the thing most people seem to be excited about on social media that I saw are just the like visual references and Easter eggs and things in it. But seeing Freddy Krueger on there at least shows you the level of pop culture icon status that character achieved. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's be a big part of it in any way, shape, or form. But
yeah. I'm interested because it's Spielberg for sure. So I think obviously I think in the book, you know, there's a lot of references to a bunch of his films, but I think I heard Spielberg is kind of staying away from digging into too much of his own stuff, which is a shame on one hand. On the other hand, I totally see why. I would probably be like that too. Like as far as not wanting to seem like, you know, I was trying to service myself. Like, you know what I mean? Give myself too many props and like, hey, remember I did this, I did this, I did this. Look how awesome I am. But at the same time, like, man, this stuff was so awesome. You know, I would hate that if he just neglected a lot of that just for that reason alone and didn't like embrace the impact he had and continues to have.
Yeah, I mean, so, and he's somebody too, at least he remembers the 80s and was a big part of it. So
yeah.
Hopefully that'll be able to transfer over well. Some other
that'll be a VH1 show if VH1's around. In like 20 years, I remember the 80s.
I'm pretty sure it already is.
Well, no, now it's I love the 80s.
Oh.
But like in 20 years, people are going to be so much older. There'll only be so many people that actually remember the 80s. So it'll just be, you know, older people just telling stories about the 80s.
I mean, too, like, I love the 80s as well, but it's an era that at this point is kind of overdone as a reference point for movies.
Yeah.
I mean, we can even be guilty of this, too. You know, everything has a synth soundtrack, and it has, like, a certain color palette, and all these different things that you see out there. So I think that, like, the 80s influence will probably exist for a long time, but in terms of, like, actually liking the stuff from the 80s... we'll get further and further away from that. And, you know, along those same lines, the trailer for Stranger Things Season 2 got released. And, you know, it has Joust in it. Or no, it's not Joust. It's Kingslayer. Right?
I don't know. I didn't watch the trailer.
Oh.
The Joust... The Joust ostriches, though, are in Ready Player One, that trailer.
Dragon's Lair. Sorry, it's Dragon's
Lair. Okay, yeah.
The like the anime looking game. So that, you know, they are in an arcade and they're playing Dragon's Lair. But
that game sucks in arcades because it's so damn hard.
Yeah,
it's just trial and error.
Yeah. So it looks like they're hinting at like kind of bigger things to come. And of course, if you've seen any of the promo stuff, you've seen like the image of like the kind of huge looking creature. And it looks like the Upside Down will be back. So, and then the trailer too is set to Michael Jackson's Thriller in some ways. And look, you know, like the show's going to take place around Halloween because we're like wearing Halloween costumes. So, you know, it looks like the show is going to deliver more of what people liked about the first season, and then even more like 80s references because it's set in 1984? So like Ghostbusters is out because the kids were wearing like Ghostbusters costumes and stuff like that. So. Like, hopefully it'll live up to expectations from the first season, but, you know, looks like it's going to have even more 80s-ness to it than it did the first time around.
I'm looking forward to watching it. I just didn't watch a trailer because I'm like, at this point, it's not like one of my most anticipated things, but also I would rather go in pretty fresh on it, you know, because it obviously we're going to get it all at once. If it was like going to be a 12-month thing, like or a 12-week thing where there's like 12 episodes, one a week, then I'd probably would definitely watch the trailer. But knowing that you get everything at once, it's almost just like a quick burst of enjoyment, and then you can kind of forget about it. You know what I mean? Yeah,
like the whole like Netflix releasing all the episodes at once versus something like Twin Peaks: The Return, which we've been doing like videos on, where it's doled out like, you know, week by week and you don't get the entire story at once. Like, there is something to be said for the kind of communal aspect of watching a show as it's airing and everybody's at the same point. So there's discussion that you see online or in the real world about it. And that all happens at the same pace as opposed to like we talked about doing videos for like Twin Peaks, or not Twin Peaks, for Stranger Things Season 2. And it's like, well, what do you do? Do you do like one video that covers all the episodes, or do you cut it in half? And like, how are people watching these? Because I usually watch Netflix series that I'm invested in within like a week, and try not to like wait too long because inevitably somebody will spoil something.
Yeah.
So how that, I mean, like, if it was going to be released like as a weekly thing, I think I'd almost be more excited, because I'm starting to get to the point where I don't want to have to watch everything in like 5 days in order to not get spoiled. But otherwise, you're just not checking the internet a lot. I mean, like,
yeah. And two, it's like you don't have time to actually process or appreciate a lot of it when you're kind of sucking in 10 hours of content at once. Then it's like you barely remember episode 2 and 3 because you were thinking about it for that half hour and then you moved on to the next thing, you know?
I mean, to be fair, though, too, there's a lot of times when you're watching the show and you're like, man, I wish I could just keep going. I could watch more of this.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Every week with Twin Peaks. But I'm also glad at the restraint.
It's a tug and pull, which is also the name of something you get behind a strip joint for a few bucks, I guess. I don't know. The point, though, is it's like, we'll have to see, like, overall if Netflix ever adjusts their strategy, because most of the other streaming networks don't really do that. They kind of release them like over time. Because like Handmaid's Tale, which I watched with Julie on Hulu, like they had like, I think like the first 3 episodes released and then like one each week after that, and that gives you time to process and downtime, and you don't have this thing hanging over your head that you got to watch.
Yeah,
sometimes it does feel like work even when you want to watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, like, if Netflix ever hits the point to where they need like people aren't just using it as a utility, like, oh, this is my Netflix bill, I just have this. If people ever if there's a huge trend of starting a Netflix subscription when something comes out and then dropping it, only having it for 1 month, then you could see them like, okay, we're just going to release like a little bit at a time or one a week. That way people will have their subscriptions longer or something. But I guess right now, like, people want that. The majority of people want that, and I totally get that. And people just subscribe, and it's kind of the one thing that, even though a lot of people might have Hulu or Amazon Prime or Shudder, like, nearly everybody has Netflix, and then they'll pick like 1 or 2 other things to also have.
Yeah. So I'm excited for it to come back, and hopefully it's not a case of where they lose what made it popular in the first place because it got such massive success. But I'm excited to see that. I mean, because October this year, like, another thing that we can talk about before we go into what we've been watching is the trailer drop for Jigsaw, like the newest movie in the Saw series. So, like, October this year, like, I would much rather watch Stranger Things Season 2 than another movie in the Saw universe. Yeah. And it was like the trailer for Jigsaw, like, didn't give me any reason to get excited to watch one of these films again. Because I haven't really watched the Saw movies. I didn't watch all the way through to the end. I stopped watching after like 4, I believe. And I mostly watched those because they were on HBO. And it wasn't like I was going out and buying those movies or going to theaters. Because I know some people hate the term, but the torture porn films never really grabbed me. Because just like, oh, here's this person and they have to dig their eyeball out or else their head explodes. And it's like, that's not really suspense if you don't care about the person. Same
here. I only watched that first one, but I may have seen parts of the second one on TV. But to be honest, though, I watched this trailer just because I thought, okay, we might actually see this just for the website, for the podcast, depending on how it goes. But I didn't think it looked that. I wasn't like looking at it thinking like, oh, I'm dreading watching this for the podcast. And maybe it's because I've really only watched one of those, and it at least didn't look extremely. I don't know. It just didn't look extremely cheesy. It looked like a lot of those other trailers in that series, though.
Yeah.
But it did look like there was obviously some contraptions to kill, but it seemed like they were showing a lot of stuff going on outside of that made me think like, okay, this might be a much better watch than just an hour and a half of people in a room having to decide how they're going to kill themselves or something. You know what I mean? Like it at least seemed like, and I'm not saying that's what those films are. The first one had some stuff outside of that room, obviously, but yeah, hopefully it's good. I don't know. And then also too, what was it called? Leatherface, When did that trailer come out?
Yeah, the Leatherface trailer. That's like a movie that I have not been a fan really of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films that came out after the success of the 2003 one with Jessica Biel. Because like a lot of those films to me, they just don't scratch an itch. Like it's not something that I'm super excited. Like it is funny though because it has Finn Jones in it, who is in Iron Fist on Netflix. He's also on Game of Thrones, and then I believe that the kid that plays Leatherface was also on Game of Thrones and played young Hodor. So there's some Game of Thrones connections there.
And I guess Steven Dorff, maybe?
Yeah, Steven Dorff is in it, so he's doing stuff.
And it's directed by, I guess, the guys who did Inside, which that has very positive buzz. I always wanted to watch that and just never did. That was one of those Dimension Extreme films from like the late 2000s. So, you know, at least it's somebody we know of their directing credibility, you know. I'll keep an open mind for that. When is that coming out?
Let's see. Leatherface is coming out on October 20th, 2017.
And it says VOD/limited release. So,
yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, because, I mean, Steven Dorff is not a ringing endorsement of a theatrical release. I mean, because I think the last time that he was in a, you know, relevant big budget film was probably Blade. I mean, he's been in stuff since then that probably made some money, but like, you know, those leather, because they've made like, wasn't there like a Texas Chainsaw 3D, and like all the continuity of these films doesn't, like, I haven't kept up with them, because I remember after the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the sequel was a prequel that had Jordana Brewster in it, who's been like in all the Fast and Furious films. So I don't remember what the timeline for all these films is. I mean, if there's good buzz around this, we might check it out. It's just like people forget, like, you know, Halloween and Friday the 13th have been having trouble getting sequels off the ground for years, but these Leatherface or Texas Chainsaw movies have been getting made consistently since the early 2000s when the remake kind of kicked it all off. I mean, they weren't gone for that long because there's the ones in the 90s too that had like Matthew McConaughey and
Renee
Zellweger. So like they continue making those movies. There was not as much of a gap in that series as there has been in others. But two, it's also like, well, is this the mainline continuity? Like, do these have anything to do with some of the other ones? Like, I'm not sure, because this is a prequel about a teenage Leatherface who escapes from a mental hospital, and then it says they kidnap a young nurse and go on a road trip from hell. So what this turns out to be, who knows? But if it gets positive buzz and is decent, we'll check it out. But
we've also got the Chucky film, I think. Is that October also?
You know, is it Cult of Chucky that there's been some positive buzz about, and it is coming out on November 2nd.
Oh, really?
Or let's see. That says Australia.
I saw something that said October 20th.
Is that? Let's see. Because I haven't really kept up with that, because I haven't really watched any of the... I remember the Chucky... The last thing I remember from Chucky was when he was on it was like WCW or WWF Wrestling and was trash-talking a wrestler before they made like Bride of Chucky or something. Let's see.
Yeah, I watched the trailer for that. It looked pretty good. For another Chucky film.
It's going to be out on October 3rd on Blu-ray, DVD, and digital. So it'll be out on October 3rd, so you can watch that. So if that's good, we'll probably check that out too. I haven't really watched, like I said, like some of the ones that came out after Bride of Chucky, just because I was like, the doll's not scary, and some of these movies just are not good. But if that one gets, positive buzz, we'll have to check that out just to see what it is. I think that was all the news, or at least the news we found to be relevant. So I guess now we can go into discussing what we've been watching. And I really did not have a chance to watch much of anything aside from Twin Peaks and The Night of the Living Dead, because I was busy this past week with work stuff and didn't have chance to watch much. But yeah, Twin Peaks, you can just check out. We're doing like the video recaps each week. So If you enjoyed the original series, well, no, you could enjoy the original series and hate this one just because it's so vastly different. But if you watch the original series and you watched Firewalk with Me and loved Firewalk with Me, then you'll just love this show. And
or if you're just a David Lynch fan and you are, you know what I mean, you can easily digest his films that he's made as well, then this will be right up your alley. But if you probably know all that, then you're probably already watching the show.
Yeah, and it's one of those shows where like the live ratings for it are pretty abysmal, but the ratings, once they take into account streaming and all the delayed viewing and stuff, is decent and like not terrible for a Showtime show. I mean, it's nowhere close to Game of Thrones numbers where it's pulling in like 20 million people, but the show has an incredibly devoted fan base that's very into the story. It's one of those things I think will benefit from once it's all out and done, people watching it in chunks, because I think even though it's probably I think works better just watching it week to week, I think there are some people who just want to watch it all at once. Which, you know, you might get spoiled, so continue on that path at your own peril. But, you know, so far I've been loving that.
Yeah.
And, you know, the filmmaking in it and all that is so different from what you get, because there's like the best and worst things combined. You get a shot or like a sequence that takes far too long for what it is, but at the same time is what makes it good. But then you wish it was quicker so you could see something else. But then in the moment, it's so entertaining that so it's like this push and pull. It gives you the best and worst of TV. I mean, it's obviously good, or you know, at least I've enjoyed it. But it's almost an anti-show, or almost like has the intentions of trying your patience sometimes with the way that certain things play out. And then there's also some just very goofy Lynchian type stuff, and then some very dark and very sinister stuff that plays like horror films. So I've enjoyed the ride so far, and you can check the videos that we've been doing on those episodes to see us kind of talk about what happened in the episodes, and then like theories on where it's going. So by the time the series is done, you can go back and watch to see how completely wrong we were on all the stuff we predicted. But yeah, I didn't really have a chance to watch much else this week.
Yeah, I mean, Twin Peaks, said it before, it's my favorite thing this year, and maybe, I don't know. I don't know what I watched previously that I liked better than this, like, that has been made in my lifetime, as far as, you know what I mean, like seeing it live or in theaters or something like that. Like, there's been nothing like this ever. And that's what makes it so good as well. It feels so fresh. And kind of related to Twin Peaks: The Return and some Lynch films, Peter Deming, you know, he shot that show, Mulholland Drive, and some other stuff of his, Evil Dead 2. I watched another film he shot, at least part of it, which was Drop Dead Fred with Phoebe Cates. And I hadn't seen that since it was on like Fox when it premiered, like, you know, on TV for the first time. And I never had a like desire to revisit it too much, other than like I remember being excited for it coming on, and I remember thinking like it was okay, but I was also probably like, I don't know, it came out in 91, yeah, so I was 6. But the only reason I watched it is because we were at a cabin this weekend and they had a bunch of DVDs there because they had no cable, and we were kind of going through it, and I made it about maybe 25 minutes in. I was like, yep, this is as bad as I expected it was going to be. So I normally just like watch stuff through, and it's pretty rough. It's weird because some of the humor is so goofy, but at the same time they like cuss a lot and do some pretty like adult humor things as well. So it's very baffling. Like, who is this made for? I feel like it's just made for maybe certain adults that have a childlike wonder, or, you know what I mean? Like, which is totally fine, but it's a rough film. Let's see. I also watched Total Recall, the original, which I had only seen I didn't realize, but I had only seen like very little of that on TV before. I like that film quite a bit. Super enjoyed that. And the cast in that is awesome. Schwarzenegger is great as always. I just like the look and the feel of that film. Let's see here. I'm trying to think. Watched a bit of Alf. I think I told you about that earlier. I watched that, and now Alf holds up.
Alien life form.
Yes, Alf definitely holds. It's been a long time. Like, I watched that when it came on, and I have not watched any reruns or anything. But like all the like, of course it's cheesy at parts, but like the Alf humor a lot of times playing off the family, it holds up and it is still really funny. Like I probably watched 9 or 10 episodes of that. And then I watched Day of the Dead before we went on vacation, just because like I said, we kind of talked about watching that, or I brought it up right before Romero passed away.
Yeah.
And then
Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and so I was like, "Oh, did it? Day of the Dead did?"
Yeah, that's how I was going to discuss watching it.
Oh, I watched it on a Vudu, I guess because I saw it was on there a little bit earlier. But yeah, I love that film. I was just kind of in the mood to watch it anyway, and I was like, even if we cover it within a couple weeks or something, I'm happy to rewatch that film because I've seen it several times before, but it had been a while. Oh, wait
a minute, no, it's not on Prime. I'm wrong.
Okay.
It was just on Vudu then.
Yeah, it's on like the Vudu free thing. So there's like commercials, but it's not like Crackle. It's like there might be like 5 commercials total.
Yeah, it's on Shudder is why I was seeing that.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. That's the 2008 one.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, not that one. Not that one.
No, the original one, the George Romero one, that is not on this services. I guess it's just on Vudu then is what we discussed.
Yeah,
So-
and you, like I said, you can watch it for free. It's actually the one with Nathan Thomas Milner, the cover he did for
for Scream Factory. Yeah.
Scream Factory. Yeah, it's that cover. But like when I first watched that film, I thought, oh wait, I think this might be my favorite,
Of the
Romero
Dead.
Dead film. And then I would go back and forth and be like, well, I really love Night, and then Dawn is really awesome, but I think I may have landed, and at this point in time, I think Day is my favorite, just because it lacks some of the cheese that's in Dawn, which I don't mind at all.
Yeah.
But it lacks some of the cheese, but it still has some of the humor, and it's also more. It feels more intimate, like Night in some ways. I don't know. There's just something I really love about Day, but at the same time, it doesn't kind of have. I don't know. I guess it goes in a direction you don't expect, and it's not one that's easily mimicked in a film. Like Dawn, zombie film set in the mall. You can make 100 of those.
Yeah.
And they would all be a little bit different, but they would still have, Night, people trapped in a house, zombies attacking, and the people kind of, arguing and fighting each other. You could take that, like, Day is not, it's not that easily broke down. Like it is, like there's scientists and military man in an underground base, and they're arguing over what decisions to make. But it's, I don't know, it just feels so much more maybe organic and less, I don't know the word for it, but I just really like that film, and I love the tone and some of the humor and the characters. And I think that film is awesome. And then, yeah, I guess, Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan film. Enjoyed it quite a bit. I like that it's pretty short. It's only like an hour and 47 minutes. That sounds kind of bad to start out of the gate. Like, I like that it was short, but it was kind of refreshing that it wasn't a 3-hour horror film.
Well, because most Nolan movies are relatively long to begin with.
Yeah. And I think maybe too, because this is dialogue light. So I think, if you're not shooting dialogue, you can shoot a half hour. You can fill up a half hour of film with 2 people talking if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So this is a lot of action, and kind of some of it is silent filmmaking in the fact that there's no dialogue. You're just watching these things unfold on screen. And sometimes the characters aren't speaking because crap is going on around them, and they're just speaking with their eyes or, just kind of communicating in other ways. And I really like that style of film. I love those films that kind of are able to strip away the dialogue and do it through visuals primarily. Sometimes it can be super strong and super effective. This isn't maybe the strongest example of that, but it is really good. And not to say that it's like there's no dialogue at all, but it very much is kind of, it's light on that. It's an hour and 47 minutes. So not only does it not have like a ton of exposition dumps and dialogue, like action is always happening, but it's like a series of tense events and you're kind of following some characters along, and it's almost like you're able to follow them along and then see these terrible situations that a lot of these soldiers were put in, under certain circumstances, and not just like, oh, just on a beach or something like that. Like they find themselves in different situations, and we kind of jump characters too to see other perspectives. The editing, I'm not going to spoil like how it's edited or whatever. Some of that I felt like it was just a way to try to make it more interesting than maybe the story was if it was told in a straightforward fashion. But I also feel like it was almost a contrived thing. Like they decided to do that to kind of to amp it up. But at the same time, it almost took away from the film a little bit because it was unnecessarily confusing at parts. It wasn't like you were trying to figure out a puzzle or anything like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like overly complicated, but then it was like a little bit more complicated than it needed to be at certain points. And the kind of the payoff is okay, but it's not like stellar as far as like the way they chose to edit that film. But yeah, all the acting was great. It felt, well, I was watching it too, it's PG-13, and I kind of appreciated that. It's very, I don't know, the sound design is incredible in it. Like it's very impactful. The music is really good. Some of it feels like, in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 when you're underwater running out of water, it felt like they did an orchestral version of that, and it just amped up the tension, and they would just keep going and going and going. And a lot of the music kind of told you how to feel. Like even if the characters weren't freaking out on the outside, it kind of made you understand how they were probably feeling on the inside, even though they were holding their composure and just doing what they had to do to survive. But because it's PG-13, it's something I appreciate it, because as soon as the film starts, like we see a couple things, and then before you see any like major violence, suddenly somebody gets kind of blown off the ground, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to see a lot of this. But I immediately was thinking about Saving Private Ryan, of course, and like the opening scene of that film, and that the first time you watch it, it is like a little, like it is horrifying, and it's like, oh man, this is really intense. But after watching that film several times, you're desensitized, and then you're almost looking for it. You know what I mean? Like I remember when that film came out, it was on, watching on a VHS with people, like random people and stuff, and adults even at the time, because I was younger, and they'd be like, "Oh, here comes the scene where this guy gets ripped in half." You know what I mean? It felt, now that kind of feels gratuitous to me a little bit in that context. It's one thing if it's a horror film. It's another thing if you think they're trying to make a message out of it or to honor people or whatever. So I kind of really appreciated that Dunkirk was actually PG-13 and not just like, oh, they made it for a wide audience. Like, no, I think that was probably the right approach, because even though they weren't showing people split in half, he was able to sell all of those feelings through tension. And we've seen people split in half in films 1,000 times. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't have added that much more. We've seen Saving Private Ryan, that beach scene and many other films like it. So I also really appreciated that part. And it's probably, I'd have to watch, a couple of the Batman films again, but it's up there with them for me. Because I think I have less problems with this than I do some of his other films, like Interstellar or Inception, which Inception I liked a lot better than Interstellar. So I think this is my favorite film of his in a very long time, if maybe ever, I don't know. Just because it was a different approach to how he normally handles his film, because sometimes the dialogue can be a little rough. And because he kind of got away from that, he avoided some of those pitfalls. But at the same time, I wasn't as drawn into these characters as I maybe expected to be. And I don't know if it's because it just feels like some of the emotion or, I don't know, some of it just feels more fabricated than it does in some films. Like some movies, kind of the feelings of the characters and what they're going through and the emotions kind of feel very much just natural and just there. This almost feels like he set up a bunch of sequences to make you feel these things. And I don't know, it just felt like it comes from a different place from him. So while I wasn't like super drawn into some of the characters, it was almost like I was more drawn into the people that lived this experience. Yeah. And maybe that was the goal too. Maybe it wasn't like but maybe it wasn't like you had to worry about these couple characters or this person. Maybe it wasn't about them. It was more about the people who went through this and just everybody involved, because it does kind of split up the perspective at times. But that being said, I wasn't drawn into one person in particular. So it also pulled away from me being like super invested in the characters I saw on screen. But I know it's not a horror film, but it's a very interesting film, and I know it's doing well. But thumbs up on Nolan for that one, because he's hit or miss for me. Normally hit for sure, but I thought he did a great job with it. It's not my favorite film of the year, but it's definitely in the top 10, and it's the type of films I like to watch, as far as ones that rely on visual storytelling and that kind of they break the mold, and it's not exposition, action, exposition. You know what I mean? Like it's very much just you watch it and you just experience it, and then it's over. So.
Oh, did you see it in any form of IMAX or just standard?
I mean, I saw it IMAX, but we don't have an actual
70 millimeter
IMAX screen.
Yeah.
And the audio was very, very loud. Like, Nicole's pregnant, and she said like Ava was going crazy at times. And we looked it up afterwards, and it's actually stressful for the baby if it's super loud.
Oh.
And the guy, like, I mean, I would think like, yeah, if you suffer from PTSD, like, I would maybe say tread lightly going to see this film, just because it does amp up the tension, and the gunshots are so loud in it. And I don't know if it's because we were watching an IMAX or what, but the sound mix, they had it cranked up in there, and it was like super, super effective. And Nicole said like the guy that was kind of sitting down from us, I saw him close his ears quite a bit. And she said, yeah, he was closing it a lot and jumping really bad. She said he didn't know if she had PTSD, and said he was like, crying at moments and stuff. Like it's, I've heard it's very much, it does a very good job at portraying kind of some of the realities, or at least maybe the emotion and the feeling of actually being there. And I could see that for sure. But not my favorite film of the year, but a well done Christopher Nolan film. So I'm glad to see that this turned out really well, because it's his most beautiful film, I think. Visually, it's the best looking one.
All right, so if that's everything, we can move into the discussion of Night of the Living Dead. And it's the 1968 film from George Romero, which did get remade by Tom Savini years later, but we're just discussing the original. And, I mean, there's a lot to say about the movie, and because it is like, as I've read a lot of articles in the wake of George Romero's passing that said, like, beyond his movies, like, he had a big impact on independent film. Because in 1968, when this came out, there wasn't like the booming independent scene that we kind of have today, where you have like, in today's world, you have the big budget studio pictures, you have the kind of in quote unquote independent films with stuff that has like Brad Pitt and others in it, where they just secured financing independent of the studio system and then sold it at a festival to a studio to distribute it and things like that. And then you have the truly independent film, where you have, independently raised money, people producing it, and then like distributing it themselves or through third parties that handle like specifically independent stuff. And then you have the streaming services and all these different things now that make it far more efficient to make a movie and get it out to people and make it available, because you can put it on iTunes and Amazon and YouTube, and then you can get on Netflix, but Netflix has to like meet with you and like review it and then like make you an offer. Mm-hmm. And those offers for stuff that doesn't have big names in it and things like that can be less than satisfactory. But there's a ton of venues to get film on screens in front of people today. Night of the Living Dead, 1968, it's a little bit different world, because this is before Texas Chainsaw Massacre, before Halloween. I mean, Psycho came out before this, but in terms of, independent horror and the grindhouse stuff and a lot of the drive-in movies are kind of after this. So it, paved a way for a lot of other types of movies like this to get made. And, kind of like I said earlier at the very beginning of the podcast, kind of created the theatrical zombie we're aware of now. and
Yeah,
changed
the
it.
new the modern zombie, not like the white zombies or anything like that.
And then what's funny too is like you can't really talk about this movie without referencing the fact that it was heavily based off of I Am Legend, the Richard Matheson book, because George Romero even said before he just ripped it off big time, and they just changed certain elements of it so that it wasn't a complete ripoff. Like it was only the recently deceased that came back, and a few other things they changed, but the idea of the dead come back to life is something, and the representation on screen, regardless of whether or not it mirrors that book's depiction, like the on-screen representation kind of set the tone for what zombies would be over, the next 50, 60, 70 years. Granted, that has changed quite a bit. I mean, the way these zombies are portrayed in this movie is not exactly the exact same way. Even if the ones today are based off of that basic concept, they have more makeup, they have more prosthetics, they have more going on. They don't just have people in like blue makeup and then like a fake hand being like put through like slats on a window and hit with a knife and stuff. Like, it was made on a relatively low budget back in in the 60s. And
I think it was, let's see here, 114,000.
Which, if you transfer it to a budget today, that's still that's far more than the 114. I think
They said it's
like
almost
800.
800,000, and then it grossed approximately 30 million, equivalent to 210 million in 2017.
So
over 263 times the budget, and one of the most successful independent films ever made.
Yeah, so definitely changed the way a lot of film was made, and beyond, like I said, beyond just the zombie aspect, the independent genre kind of movie that at the time a lot of people were down on it because of the content and thought it was gonna be like disturbing for children, but now you have this entire cottage industry of stuff where the entire point is to be offensive and not for children, and well, I guess too, like, since we didn't discuss it off the top, the basic synopsis is from IMDb. There is panic throughout the nation as the dead suddenly come back to life. The film follows a group of characters who barricade themselves in an old farmhouse in an attempt to remain safe from these flesh-eating monsters. And like in the movie, they call them ghouls on the radio broadcast. And this is one of those movies too where it made a social issue, as a lot of horror films do, without really, or made a social statement without necessarily intending to do so. Because the lead character, Ben, is played by Dwayne Jones, who's an African-American actor. And I think that like the part was written as like a white guy. And then when they cast Dwayne Jones, they didn't change it and make it ethnic. They just left it as it was. I think he even made them kind of bring the dialogue levels up a little bit, because it was written for more of like a blue-collar worker, and he was educated and didn't want to, dumb down the dialogue. So I think that, and it's funny to think today, in today's world, I mean, or maybe not based on the way some movies and TV shows work, that, back in that era, having a black lead and it not be a thing in the script, like that was not the standard way things ran back then.
And especially because most things ran through a studio system. You know what I mean? Like I think that was, again, the independent element. They could just do whatever they wanted to and didn't really think about, they weren't thinking necessarily, sad to say, the bottom line as far as profit or whatever. Like, oh, people won't want to see this because it has a black lead or whatever. And it's a lot of times independent film that kind of, they'll start a trend or kind of...
They'll stumble onto a trend.
They'll stumble upon a trend, or you know what I mean. They'll make a move that studios are afraid to make, and then the studios will follow suit after that. So again, that's like a great benefit to working outside the studio system. Which you said all those things about how influential kind of his career in this film was as far as independent cinema goes, and is definitely as he said many times, like he liked working outside of the system as much as he could, and he did make some studio films like Creepshow and Monkey Shines, and I think Land of the Dead. I think that was a studio picture, but yeah, he obviously very much preferred working outside the system because of that creative freedom. Because
like Monkey Shines is something that kind of got changed dramatically from what his vision for it was to what got released. But like Creepshow, was like a big success as well, and like a movie that a lot of people saw. So I mean, in terms of, and then like Dawn of the Dead was a big success. And, Day of the Dead was still successful, not as big as the prior two. And then his Diary of the Dead was somewhat of an ill-fated attempt to, in 2008 or 7, whenever it came out, to do found footage, but to incorporate social media and a lot of things into the zombie lore. And to me, it felt more like somebody who was aware of those things but didn't really understand them using it.
Yeah.
Now he could have.
It was a great concept at the time, and the found footage wasn't, overly done yet.
That was before Paranormal Activity. It was the same general time frame of when Cloverfield came out and some other stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So it was before Paranormal Activity made that a thing where everybody and their brother was making anything they could found footage trying to make a buck. It was before that. It was post Blair Witch and things like that. It was an interesting idea, and the idea was better than the execution. But Night of the Living Dead is a movie where it's black and white. There's some colorized versions out there. If you go on YouTube, you can find a bunch of different versions of this movie, but the black and white is the one to watch. The colorized
Yeah, I've never seen the colorized or 3D. I was actually reading earlier tonight. I have this book of, I can't remember what it's called. I can go grab it in a minute, but essentially it has interviews with all kinds of different horror directors, and it had one with Romero, and it was from 1990 while they were doing Night of the Living Dead, the remake. And, he said he was a 50-year-old filmmaker, and it's funny just seeing his picture there and how young he looks. And he's talking about even doing the remake, he's being very candid. And they're talking about, why do a remake? And he's like, well, I didn't actually want to do one. I just kind of went along with it, just like I did with the colorized version. He was basically the distributors, nobody, I guess the distributors got money out of the first one, but he was they were going to do something. So I said, might as well be involved with it. And then that way I can, have some say in it, and hopefully we'll make a little bit of money out of it. He has obviously never been a fan of, he doesn't really care about making the money too much. I don't think. It seems like he's very much wanted to do what he wants to do. But in those situations, because he made almost nothing off Night of the Living Dead, due to not being savvy about the business, I don't blame him. I would have remade this film 5 times over if it was my cash cow and it could keep me making, other things like Diary or Survival or just anything on the independent level.
Because, from our perspective, we made some short films and stuff, and at some point we're going to try and make a feature, next year or so. And when you're getting this stuff put together, you don't really think about the business aspect. You do to some extent, how can we get this made? But when you decide that you want to make a movie, and we haven't made one, I just from talking to other people and reading other things about people who have made movies, you make a movie, you get it done. If you don't already have distribution lined up for it, which you typically would not on first film or an early film, then once you get it done, you got to show it to people and try to get someone else to purchase it from you, and then distribute on your behalf, or distribute it, self-distribute, which requires, in this day and age, to get it in iTunes, it costs $1,000 to get closed captioning for it, and to get it through the proper encoding channels, and it has to go through a production company that's worked with them a certain number of times. So it costs $1,000 to get it in iTunes. To get it on Amazon Prime, as long as you have a closed caption file, you can get on there. Netflix, you have to submit, it's $800 or $1,000 or something to submit it to them, and they may decline it, or they may accept it, and offer you less than the cost to submit it. So there's a lot of different channels like that. Or once you get it done, you can sell it to somebody else. They give you a fee for it. You made the movie for $20,000, they offer you $50,000. And you're like, oh, that's great. But then it goes on to make $1 million or $10 million or $30 million, and you're still stuck with your original cut because you don't have the clout when you're starting out early to get all the money. So even John Carpenter has talked before about how Halloween, he didn't get the vast chunk of that profit. It wasn't to him, which is why I think he was more apt to sign on to remakes and producer roles on sequels just to take the paycheck. Because if you can continue doing the stuff you want to do and then make some extra money, why not?
Yeah.
So nobody can fault George Romero for that. And especially when he did Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and then did other, studio fare. And, it seemed like his independent streak was what he had more interest in. And two, he got to go to all those different cons and do the autograph sessions and things like that. So I'm sure that somebody at his stature, that could be a pretty decent chunk of income to keep the bills getting paid and stuff like that over time. I mean, especially as the cons have gotten to be so prevalent now and much bigger than they used to be. Or like maybe there's more money in them now. I don't know. I know like
it's a weird thing. Like I don't know how it is for the people who are having autographs signed, but I think people that are selling stuff, from what I've talked to certain people that have set up at them, like they feel like the bottom's close to falling out on as far as a lot of the artists and stuff like that making money there
because there's too many cons and they charge too much.
Yeah, and I think the prices have gone up on the people that are giving the autographs too. So it's
Well, too, I see a lot of people that complain like they go to a con and Norman Reedus has an 8-hour line where it's $50 an autograph or picture or something, and then you have horror royalty sitting over there with like 3 people in line.
Yeah.
And, you have, I'm trying to remember what some of the examples were of people. You'll have like Sid Haig or somebody that's over there and doesn't have much of a line at all. Or, someone like George Romero, like, I don't know what the lines were for him at different events. But, yeah, so there's like that side of it. But, back to the movie itself, Night of the Living Dead, it's something that you can watch for free if you want. Like, it's on YouTube just because of the copyright issues with it, where I believe it was due to the fact that the laws of the time it was made and released, they had the copyright information on the title cards and then changed the title, so cut that out. Mm-hmm. And then that is what led to the rights issues with it. And that is, because the copyright status entered into the public domain because they did not have a copyright indication on the prints of the film. And in 1968, copyright law required a proper notice for a work to maintain a copyright. So it was on the original title of the film, Night of the Flesh Eaters, but when they removed the title and changed it, that got cut out. So it's in the public domain, so you can watch it for free, and that's why it's in a bunch of movies and a bunch of short films, a bunch of everything in the background, because it's free and it's so prevalent and widely known. So, like, was it and as of 2017, this is from Wikipedia, Amazon.com lists copies of Night of the Living Dead. There's 18 VHS copies, 219 DVD, 10 Blu-ray, and 44 on Amazon Video. So there's all kinds of different versions of it. Now, there is a version where it got restored to like 4K, and according to George Romero before he passed, because he saw it, so it was the closest that's ever existed to his full vision for it. That will be hitting theaters later this year. I believe it's going to be showing in New York first, and then other theaters later in the year in like October, and then hopefully hitting Blu-ray and DVD, I would hope, through like Criterion or something.
Sure.
So that will hopefully be something that will be available to watch and or purchase sooner than later, because it's a landmark movie, and the fact that George Romero passed away just makes it all that more important. But the movie itself is something where sometimes we talk about do things hold up? Can you show this to a modern audience? This is something that I think that like the current set of movie watchers or TV watchers who love The Walking Dead and have never really watched the stuff that inspired it, if somebody who only likes The Walking Dead, if you showed them this, who's somebody's like 18 or whatever, they're probably not going to like it. From the fact there's little to no gore. I mean, there is some, but there's not much, and it's mostly characters holed up in a single location, which fans of The Walking Dead are accustomed to. But it's played out. It's in the late '60s, so the acting style is a little bit different, and like the zombie effects is mostly people walking around with like light amounts of makeup on, and they're played a little bit differently than they are, in modern movies. In terms of, it's the shambling slow zombies, which are kind of like the hallmark of the Romero zombies. It's not the infected type things from like 28 Days Later or some of the newer movies where there's zombies running or the infected running. So it's not, so it has like these slower moving zombies, and like I said, there's not a lot of violence. For the time there was, but today it is so funny though to watch stuff like Dawn of the Dead that was like it was going to be rated NC-17 or X or whatever the time was released. They just released it as unrated. But today it would not be as bad as what's on The Walking Dead.
Oh God, no, yeah.
So these movies, it's funny seeing how they're rated at the time and then how it will be viewed now. But this is a movie that for impatient fans, or like younger fans, or people who are only kind of into the more modern, up-to-date movies, I think this would not be a super enjoyable watch for somebody who's like 16 that is only into like modern movies. But
yeah, I got this copy. I got my copy at. I was working I think it was when I was working as like Barney and Baby Bop. Like the big characters or whatever.
Yeah.
At the fairgrounds here in town at like some Christmas thing. And they had it was basically like a Christmas flea market. And on my break, they had a DVD table, and Night of the Living Dead was one of the copies. I was probably like 15 or something. It was like before I could drive and like before I'd had like a steady job, like it was 14 or 15 one. And I picked it up because I had a little cash from working, that and a couple other things. And like I saw it and like fell in love with it immediately and like thought it was amazing. The only other zombie film I'd really kind of watched was one of the Return of the Living Deads. And I thought it was like pretty cool. It wasn't the first one. It was one of the other ones. That was like pretty cool, but it wasn't like anything earth shattering to me. Like I knew what zombies were. It wasn't, I saw that like in middle school. But like this film, basically the end of it too was really, I thought was incredible. And just many things about it. I was like, oh, okay, this is what a zombie film is. Like I was all on board and I was so excited for this film when I kind of discovered it, and I watched it like several times. And I remember having people over. This is kind of to your point of showing it to people nowadays. Like even in 2002 or maybe 2003, I had people over from school, and it was like guys and girls and stuff. And I was like, okay, I've got this movie, and I put it on, and like within, 20 minutes, like everybody was checked out. You know what I mean? Like everybody was off the couch and like doing other things in my house. And it's before cell phones, so nobody was like on their phones, and like everybody was just gone and they didn't want to watch it. And I was like heartbroken. I was like, no, It's a really good movie. Just watch it. But like now, yeah, I totally would not force this on somebody now. But at the time I was like, I didn't feel like it was this was before 28 Days Later. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't like a lot of things to compare this to as far as zombies go on a mainstream level. And none of them had really ever watched a zombie film before. But like even then they couldn't hang in there and just watch it.
Yeah, because like when like in the high school era or the early college era for us, like you had 28 Days Later, the Dawn of the Dead remake, Shaun of the Dead. So you had those that kind of came out and reinvigorated the zombie like genre of everything. And then you saw like a sequel. You saw 28 Weeks Later. They tried to remake Day of the Dead, but it was terrible.
God.
Like in 2008. So you saw like other things like that, and then of course the Walking Dead comic started, and that show started and debuted in 2010. And there was a lot of other zombie stuff that came out. And then you had Warm Bodies, which was like the kind of zombie romantic comedy type movie.
Which I thought that was fun. I kind of like that.
It was a fun movie. Yeah, it had Nicholas
Yeah.
Hoult, who's in like the X-Men films as Beast, and it had Teresa Palmer that was in Lights Out.
And
So
Rob Corddry.
So you had these different zombie films that came out and kind of reinvigorated the genre. Because like even Shaun of the Dead only made in the U.S. like under $20 million. But I think the influence of it and video performance and things went further. And then, of course, Dawn of the Dead did well and made decent money. But then you just saw a lot of zombie things become, part of the popular consciousness again. You saw it in video games, too. They have, like, the Call of Duty, like, zombie editions and Left 4 Dead. So, that, like, the zombies
and Resident Evil. That actually, before Night of the Living Dead, that was, like, my biggest, touchstone as far as zombies goes. And I loved Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2.
And it's funny thinking now that Resident Evil came out in 2002, so that was a bit ahead of the curve on the zombie train, but it was played more like a sci-fi action movie.
You're talking about
The movie.
Oh yeah, the movie. Yeah,
the movie. So
yeah.
the Resident Evil movie came
Yeah.
out in 2002. I mean, the games came out like 95 or 96.
Yeah, I think
then-
96 maybe.
But like Resident Evil the movie, like, so it came out before, because 28 Days Later was after that. 28 Days Later was 2002 as well. But so, it was at kind of the early stages. Let's see, but it didn't come out in the U.S. till 2003. So, Resident Evil was kind of ahead of the curve and came out earlier and was based on like a very popular zombie property. And George Romero was in discussions to direct Resident Evil at one point. And he directed one of the commercials for him for like Resident Evil 2 in Japan, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that movie left so little of a mark on the genre of zombies, I think, and it went further away from that with every movie they made, that it's not really thought of when you think about the zombie revival, even though it probably played some role. Like, it was more of a sci-fi action series than a zombie series. And, there's a lot of Romero influence in those games. Because the first one's you're kind of in a mansion, you're kind of stuck in one location. I mean, there's more to it. And there's like an underground base and stuff, but so Night of the Living Dead is very much like the claustrophobic, stuck in the house, interacting with a limited number of other characters that you don't see until a good deal into the movie, and there's all these elements that make it claustrophobic and make it the black and white, I think, to me just adds to the atmosphere. Because like I said, the colorized versions, they are what they are. I would prefer to watch the black and white because to me it just makes it creepier. But the being stuck in the house, and you have like the element of, like, the basement, and you have like the conflict, and you have the lead character who's like the smart, strong character is a black guy, and it's not really a thing. Because, in that role, too, George Romero did not intend to make a social statement. He just cast the best actor he knew. But in retrospect, it became all the more poignant when the way the movie ends.
Yeah, full spoilers on this.
Yeah, full spoilers. If you haven't seen this, go watch it. It's on YouTube, or you can buy one of 1,000 different versions. But when Ben, lives through the night, and the next morning the guys or the zombie hunters are out like hunting the zombies and shooting them and whatever. And, he goes upstairs and looks around, and when he's looking through the window, he gets shot in the head, and they scream like another one of the zombies. Like, that's a pretty powerful ending. Mm-hmm. And, it's a very down ending. It's not like a Hollywood happy ending. And that's what I loved. That's what like struck me so much about this film. And I took that, like, I kind of took the message that maybe wasn't totally intended. That, they saw an unarmed black man and they didn't even really think, they almost, watching it now, I'm like, okay, I put more into my mind than I realized I did. But at the time I was like, oh, they absolutely like use this as a chance to just kill somebody, And now I'm like, okay, well, they kind of, it just plays quickly, and it's not like much of anything. So it's not like there's a second glance or anything like that. But yeah, at the time, that's how I took it. And that's like why I fell in love with this film so much too. And that's why I was wanting to show it to everybody. I'm like, no, just wait till the end, Well, the ending is like stellar. Like, even Nicole, she was kind of checked out watching it, and I don't think she's ever watched it all the way through. And then she was like on her phone watching it some, and then at the end, she was like, "What? That's him? That's the guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's him." She's like, and I said, that's why, one of the reasons why I love this movie is like I hate this ending actually, because like it made me really feel for him. And she's like, he's not dead, is he? I'm like, yes, he's dead. She's like, that's how it ends. I'm like, yeah, and that says something. If this is a film from the late 60s that, I drag her to a lot of movies and stuff, and she's seen obviously a lot of movies without me, but like, for the ending to be like, really, they went there with it. That's what they did. Like, this is how this is going to end. Like, that really says a lot about the ending of this film. And two, like, none of the other, of the Dead films, I think, are this dour. Like, normally there's somebody that gets away. Well, the original ending for Dawn of the Dead, as written but not filmed, was incredibly down, and even more down than this. Yeah. As opposed to this was just, two, there's also the moral element of, even though at the point like where Ben's trying to get back into the house, and Harry kind of almost leaves him to die until Ben just forces his way back in, and then he kind of helps him a little bit. but then, gets his ass kind of kicked by Ben. But then, like, they get into the fight with, like, the gun, and then when Ben gets the gun back, he shoots and he shoots and mortally wounds Harry. Like, was he in the right for doing that? Like, it's murky.
But yeah, and it also kind of, I think, does a great job of, setting the tensions of like how serious the situation is, that maybe if he didn't do it, what would have happened to him? You know what I mean? Or the safety of the other people. Like, I don't know. I think this film does such a stellar job of setting the blueprint of, for me, what a zombie film should be. And that it's not about just the gore. The gore adds to it, kind of the brutality of the things happening around the people. And this isn't a war film, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's fine that there's some that kind of take joy in it, but it's used to kind of up the tension and kind of brutality of people having to, murder their own family members, or whatever. But like, this does so many things right as far as like, okay, let's build on tension. And again, you can have slow moving zombies that create a lot of tension because it's a shambling thing that's never going to stop coming towards you. The worst thing they could be doing, and kind of the most horrifying thing, is to be eaten alive, and that's what they do. But also, it's the human element of relationships and kind of what people do when they're pushed up against the wall. Like, it does so many of those things and introduces those into the genre and creates the genre that I mean, that's absolutely what I love about this movie and why it is like so important. And thankfully, a lot of people actually at least attempted to pull these things from this film. Like Shaun of the Dead does a great job of that. Obviously, one of the most successful apings of this genre, or totally legitimate entries into it. But then you've got the other people that go a totally left turn and just take the other things out of it, which are not. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just not what appeals to me as far as the genre goes. It appeals to me in the strongest ways, I think.
I mean, too,
because this isn't just a slasher film,
Yeah, I mean, too, like the gore and stuff. I mean, like there is. I mean, like I think that more shocking than the gore. I mean, at the time, people may have been shocked by it. Like the corpse is kind of like at the top of the stairs, and but I think a lot of it's more of the sudden deaths of characters is what's more shocking. Because like with the truck stuff, like Tom and Judy get blown up in the truck. Yeah. And then their remains are eaten by the ghouls or zombies that are around that area. So it's one of those things where just like characters get killed in like ways you don't expect, and then they're just gone and it's just done. And like, they don't get injured and have to, have a hero moment, get to save themselves or whatever.
Yes.
It's just like they're dead, they're gone. And it's kind of unexpected. And, too, there's, like I said, there's a lot of it that through the lens of knowing when it was made and the era that it was shot in, all that stuff, like the casting stuff does give it social meaning now that was not necessarily intended by Romero when they shot it. But nonetheless, it exists and it's a part of the movie. And, there's a lot of iconic stuff in this that you'll hear or see referenced in so many movies. Like Shaun of the Dead, it's like, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Like, there's all these things.
I've always loved that line, and I still love it. Like, it makes me happy when that scene comes on. Such an awesome scene.
So there's a lot of things that get referenced in, across all mediums and all kinds of movies and shows and things. After Romero passed away, like, Robert Kirkman, who created The Walking Dead, said, like, without Romero, there's no Walking Dead. And I know, like, I've heard people be dismissive of a lot of the, like, Walking Dead and newer stuff. I mean, it's all different. You can argue about the quality of The Walking Dead as a show, but the zombies, they still have social relevance. And they still tap into elemental fears that people have. And all of that kind of stems from this movie. And, like I said, the stuff that makes it, I think, a harder watch for the modern audience is, the gore and the effects and things like that are low budget 1960s before, this was not a movie that was focused on the gore. I mean, Dawn of the Dead has more gore than this, and even that is still tame compared to today. But this was just like, at the time this came out, I imagine it's blowing people's minds. But it's one of those things, it took a little bit of time, I think, for the general critical community to come around and not just think that it's a macabre, scene of gore and death.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of critics thought about horror, even well-respected horror when it came out. And it took them to realize, like, oh, this is like an independent film movement, and this is an entire new genre of film that would be utilized well and poorly. And then, like, The Return of the Living Dead is somewhat of a sequel to this, but not really. And so, like, this also, like, parsed out that, series of films and continuity. And so there's all, like, because John Russo was the one that kind of split off. And
yeah, and he retained the Living Dead title, and that's why Romero's is of the Dead, or, but which I like Return of the Living Dead. That's a really fun film. And that's about as much as it is. It's not like a message film, and it's not really super impactful as far as other elements, quite like Night of the Living Dead is, or, Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead or Lane of the Dead. Like, I really love that he kind of just went back to the series, or went back to the, the zombie film, for those 3 decades in a row, and kind of used it as a statement about the decade. And I think he does it so well. It's an incredible franchise. Like, what other horror is there? There's no other horror series that kind of have done that, like, where they revisit, they add a new entry once a decade, and it is to kind of make a comment on the decade and society of where it's at. And it's all able to be reflected in the film. You're able to do a lot of, draw a lot of parallels between the things happening, and kind of some double meanings and stuff like that, or just things flat out, kind of making statements. And that's why I like horror is awesome, I think, and sci-fi films as well. Like, that's the kind of the special thing about them that also allows them to be entertaining as well, and not just preachy.
Well, I think too, something like, all the different messages in the movie, and something I think would still be true today is, towards the end of the movie, or during, like, the different parts of the movie, they show, like, the radio announcer or whatever, and they're talking about, like, the way they kill the dead is with, shooting them in the head. And then you see the part towards the end where there's, like, the hunt, or the different guys that just have guns that are kind of hunting them or taking them out or whatever, taking out the ghouls or the zombies. And in real life, if there was to be a zombie apocalypse, there's a certain amount of the population that would just be psyched to be able to go and gun people down.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And the movie kind of shows that. And, like, the original Night of the Living Dead, it's not super preachy. It just has all these different elements that you can read into. And it doesn't really make a thing out of them. But
yeah, or not. You know what I mean? Or you can just watch it and turn your brain off. And again, because it's not preachy, it makes it that much better.
And so there's a lot of cool things like that where, you have these little elements, but in real life, no, people would be excited to kill zombies. Like, I know people in my, personal life that I'm sure will be excited about that. But then it's easy to see too, like, this, like, dangerous, but, possibly fun situation. Granted, against a backdrop of all kinds of death and destruction and terrible things befalling people, like, there is, like, an idea of, like, an exciting element of, like, survivalist and, being against, like, this force, and there's all these things. So I see that being, like, that's why I think zombies have stayed so popular, and why so many video games pit you against zombies.
It's almost like a power fantasy thing at the same time, because it is this enemy that is easily defeatable to make you feel more powerful than them.
And it is ultimately a human, but without the elements that would make you feel morally bad about killing them.
Yeah.
So there's all the elements like that are, beneath the surface. I don't even know if that was really intended as much, because, like, I Am Legend is more of, there's this one guy who's, like, the single guy, and these other people are becoming, like, vampire type creatures, and, like, they kind of inherit the earth, and they're the ones that are running things, and he's kind of like, this killer that they're afraid of that comes at, during the day and takes them out, as opposed to this is, just mindless zombies or ghouls that are, you're just trying to kill people. And so there's that, differentiation, because, like, there is The Last Man on Earth, which came out before this movie, but if you compare this movie to The Last Man on Earth from 1964, this movie is far more brutal and more gory than Last Man on Earth.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, that just shows you at the time what that stuff was. I mean, compare it to Psycho. I mean, Psycho doesn't have much, even though there's like a little bit of blood, it's black and white, and you don't see much actual gore. It's mostly implied. And so this at the time would have been more gory, but the movie itself, the message and all that are kind of under the top layer, and a lot of it's probably mostly interpretation and looking at it through the lens of current society. But there's a lot there for a low budget horror flick from the era before horror was the commodity that it is today, or the type of commodity. Because back then, even Psycho from Hitchcock didn't get love from some critics. They thought it was too exploitive or whatever.
Yeah.
So the fact that this movie came out and had the impact that it did and set off the cultural touchstone that it did is incredibly impressive, and just shows like George Romero, somebody essentially is the godfather of an overall type of film.
Yeah.
That he then revisited in 2 different decades. More than 2 decades.
Yeah, more than 2 decades. He kind of skipped the 90s, as far as revisiting it, but then he came back with Land of the Dead. In this time too, it's like, okay, we're just I love the opening scene, but you're kind of waiting for more stuff to happen after she gets into the house. But really, once they come up from the basement, the other people, like, that's when I think it really starts picking up again, and it kind of trucks along. But yeah, and another thing too is I love what they did with the remake as well, because they made it just different enough. And apparently the Barbara was going to be like a much stronger female in this, but they loved her performance of being kind of catatonic, so they changed it. And I think and they said that's why they kind of went back to the stronger female character in the remake, which I think Romero wrote that. I think he said he wrote that within like 3 weeks or something, the remake script that Savini directed. But which I definitely want to watch that film for the podcast at some point too. But yeah, just, I don't know. This film is not, I mean, it's always going to hold like a special place in my heart because I just fell in love with it so much when I discovered it. But it isn't one that I have actually watched from start to finish in the past decade. It's kind of, and maybe it's just me moving on. Like, okay, I've found some other things that I really love or whatever, but it kind of opened up a whole new world for me because it showed me that horror films weren't just Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, which I loved those films when I was little, but I loved them as like, ooh, let's watch this thing. It's really dumb. Dumb in a good way. Like, it's really kind of creative, and we get to see some kills, and there's some topless women in here. You know what I mean? Like, it had all those things that titillized 9 and 10-year-olds. But yeah, by the time I got in high school, I wasn't watching those films a lot anymore because there wasn't much there. So watching something like this was like, okay, even though there's some great horror films out there like Poltergeist and some other things that I was already well aware of and loved, like, this was like, okay, horror films can be this now. And it was almost like this was maybe the turning point when I really, really kind of started digging into more horror and looking for films like that, and maybe branching out to films that weren't just horror as far as lines of Friday the 13th or slasher films. A lot of the things that we branch out and watch now for the site that we've talked about that are like on the edges of horror, periphery of horror, or that like maybe are horror, but they aren't maybe some people's traditional view of it, just like Twin Peaks: The Return. Like, there are some horror elements to that. Granted, that has a lot of things going on, but you know what I'm saying? Like some films that aren't solely in the subgenre, the genre of horror, but are maybe more horrifying in other aspects of it. Just like the end of this film, it's one person being shot in the head, but the context of it all at the time was the most horrifying thing about this entire movie.
Yeah. So I guess we can kind of wrap it up and give what our scores out of 10 are for Night of the Living Dead, which is a kind of tough task. So
yeah, I don't know if I can do that, man.
Because I think, like I said, there's the historical and the, historical context of how important the movie was and what it did for filmmaking, independent filmmaking in general, horror filmmaking specifically, the entire genre of zombie films. So there's like the importance that it has to that. There's the importance that it has in terms of the type of movie it was when it came out and what it did. And there's all the stuff you can take away from it now that may not have necessarily been like text in the script and intention. And then there's also the fact that it's, today, by today's standards, a little bit slow. And the effects and all that are a little bit tame, which granted, it's just a product at the time it came out. And, a lot of film people like us, we can overlook that and see it for what it was. But so it's really tough to say, okay, it gets a X out of 10 because like for some of our, some audiences, it could really be a 3 out of 10 because they think it's goofy or something. On the other end, there's people who is probably their favorite movie, so it's a 10 out of 10 because they love it for what it is. But it's so influential that you can't really ignore. So I think it's one of those movies where I may like it more, I may appreciate it more than I like watching it.
Yeah, its reputation is,
like I like right now, like talking about all these different issues under the surface of it. I like talking about that almost more than I like watching it. It's still a movie I enjoy to watch, and I'll check it out every now and then. I'm really looking forward to seeing like this restoration of it.
Yeah.
But when I sit down and watch this during October over a lot of other movies, maybe not. And like this week, a lot of times, like I've said before, like I know like you watch a lot of the podcast movies with Nicole. Like leading up to the podcast, like Julie's always like, "So what's the podcast this week?" And I'll tell her, and sometimes she watches them, sometimes she doesn't. Like this one, she had seen before, but like, I mean, she wasn't like, "Oh, wait for me to watch it." So it's one of those things where I think that like its reputation is out there, and it's a very important film. Like without this, you don't have a lot of stuff today. Without this movie, does Halloween ever get made? Does Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Do a lot of those movies ever get made? If this doesn't, like, who knows what the impact is if this doesn't happen. But at the same time, like, would I rather watch this or, Evil Dead 2 or something? Like,
I knew you were going to say that because I almost said it.
just like, just trying to think of other movies. So, like, the movie itself, like, I like to watch, like you said, you watched it in, like, over a decade.
Yeah.
Like when I realized it was on all these, like on YouTube or whatever, like, and there was actually good high quality copies, like I watched it on there. I had watched it on video and other places before, but in terms of giving a score out of 10, it's really tough to do. Like in terms of its importance and what it did for the genre and for independent filmmaking and all that stuff, it's like a 9 or 10 out of 10. In terms of a movie at the time it came out, I would have given it, like a 9 or 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Now, evaluating it now is a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
Because so much stuff has been, so much stuff has ripped it off. So much stuff has been derivative of it. Even stuff like Shaun of the Dead. So watching this or Shaun of the Dead, I probably watched Shaun of the Dead, even though it couldn't exist without that movie. So it's tough to give it a score.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like it is too, it comes from like a personal place of like, okay, this meant a lot to me. And I did watch it. Like at the time, I would watch this like every Halloween. And multiple times throughout the year. Like I'd watch this film a lot when I first got it. And that's why I just haven't watched it in the past decade, because I kind of knew all the beats, it's like I knew a lot of the dialogue actually. And just kind of like, I knew that I had that it's just imprinted into my brain. So watching it now, it's like, okay, because so much is imprinted and because I've been exposed to so many other films that have pushed the boundaries in more ways, in the past 15 years. Yeah, it's not the same film that it was when I watched it, which it was very old at the time, when I saw it for the first time. So, but I'll just judge it from when I first discovered it. And that was a 10 out of 10 for me easily when I first discovered it. You know what I mean? But yeah, now I've kind of, it does have a different place as far as my library of I still consider it one of my favorite films of all time, though.
Yeah.
But but again, I'm not going to watch it. It's going to be. It's weirdly enough, though. Now that I have watched it again, I've kind of broken that seal, and I kind of wouldn't mind watching it again in a couple weeks. I won't, because for the most part, I try to watch as much new stuff as possible because it's just like a constant flow of movies that are coming out and that I've never seen. But it was a different time whenever you got a DVD and you're like, oh, I bought this DVD. I don't have money to buy anything else, and I guess I'm just gonna. This is the only new movie I'm gonna own for the next 6 months. You know what I mean? Like it was a different time. But yeah, I'll rate it when I discovered it and was in love with it like more than anything else, and which is a 10 out of 10. And then I want to bring up one other film that is kind of like this once you get done.
Let's see. So right now on IMDb, it's a 7.9 out of 10. The Metacritic's an 87. Let's see.
Good. Yeah, well deserved.
The Rotten Tomatoes for the original Night of the Living Dead is, let me look that up real quick. And like it's tough. Like I said, it's tough to rate it because I saw this because I had seen a piece. Like I said, it was one of those things where the copyright made it where you could. It's in a lot of things, and you watch part of it and don't realize it, or at least I didn't realize it until I sat down and watched it all. I'm having terrible typing skills tonight.
It's 96% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay, so I kept typing stuff wrong. Yeah, so like it's got like the scores indicate people are aware of its significance, and like I think I'll give it a 9 out of 10 just because for what I mean it's kind of a cop out to say but like for the time that it came out and what it did, and when I saw it 20 years ago or whatever. Like, I was very involved, and the ending on it is something that is still influencing people to this day. And the way that it just abruptly ends, and then the message you can take away from it.
Yeah.
Now, if I was rating this for someone whose favorite show is The Walking Dead and doesn't like anything older than 2004 and stuff like that, this might not be something they would want to watch.
No.
But as is one of the most important films for horror, especially ever made, and for independent film at large. So
yeah, for sure. So, two things. One, I thought there was a Day of the Dead, another remake coming out, and apparently, now I've totally lost it. But let's see here. It is. Let's see here. It's 2017. It's already got the cast. I'm guessing maybe it's done. I don't know. But it is a Bulgaria production.
So
with maybe a $10 million budget, possibly. I don't, that's as much as I know about it. It's just kind of IMDb stuff, but it seems like it's all got cast listing and a director who did a film I think I was kind of hearing about called The Corpse of Anna Fritz. Like the poster looks familiar too. Foreign film. So we'll see how that turns out. But another film, this kind of Night of the Living Dead, it made me remember this other film that I'd watched shortly after I'd seen this film that was very much like it, at least the end of it, was Mosquito from 1995. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so.
So I remember just watching, I think I just happened to catch the end of it. Essentially, at least the end of it is like Night of the Living Dead. They're in this farmhouse and having to board up windows, except instead of zombies, it's these gigantic mosquitoes that are like almost human size, and they're just flying around and like hatching in the basement. And it was incredibly, I don't know, it was cool because I was like, oh, this is like another Night of the Living Dead, but with stupid mosquitoes. So if you're a fan of Mosquito, let us know in the comments. I want to revisit that film again because it was very ridiculous and fun. So that's it for me.
Yep, so that'll end our discussion of Night of the Living Dead, and that'll wrap up this podcast. So if you want to find the work we're doing, you can find us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can find all the work we're doing at housebtvsstore.com. If you're listening via iTunes, you can do us a huge favor and leave a review there, as it helps others find the podcast, and that'll help us move up the podcast charts. So we have a slowly but steadily increasing number of people listening to the podcast. That would definitely help us out. Like I said, you can find all the work at housebtvsstore.com. You can find us specifically there. You can find me on Twitter at Will_droid.
And I'm at Blevin Sean. And I was just looking at the Mosquito IMDb, and Gunnar Hansen is possibly a main character. So yeah, another reason to kind of revisit that. Yep.
And too, just on social media too, make sure to follow us on Instagram, because like we recently shot a short film that Chad was working on called Plucked. And I took some different behind-the-scenes pictures and put it on our Instagram story, and didn't put all of them up yet because we're going to make an album and put it out when we figure out more of the release date stuff on that. But follow us on Instagram to see more stuff like that, because we work on new projects or are involved in different things. I'm going to try to do more Instagram stories of things. If you get like DVDs and stuff, try to maybe do Instagram stories about that, just because it seems like something that people actually do check out. So make sure to follow us there. But so that'll bring this episode of the House by Visor podcast to a close. Thanks for listening.